So we did our presentation on engineering selves hiring into a contested field of education. The article that we read discussed engineering stereotypes, and in summary, engineers are stereotyped to be socially inept and unemotional, technical, precise, and very analytical and great problem solvers. Due to stereotypes, there is a lack of women in the engineering field. Women are stereotyped to be emotional by nature, making her not an ideal engineering problem solver. And men also claim women have difficulty keeping emotions out of mathematical problems. In addition, companies and educational institutions are concentrating on the groups that are underrepresented today in the engineering field, which does not only include women but other minority groups as well. Statistically speaking, 75% of engineering bachelor degrees go to white males, while 15% go to women. Engineering education is also a place where great students prepare themselves for careers that guarantee financial stability for their future, as well as students also experience and attend weed out classes, which establish discipline habits and attention to detail.
So I provided this quote from the reading in order to really accentuate the underrepresentation by race and gender. I'm going to just read it out real quick. If we want to supply our industries and government and our universities with the human power that we need in the future, we need to concentrate on the groups which are underrepresented today, the scientific engineering areas, which are women and minorities. This was stated by the U.S. Congress, showing that that underrepresentation is acknowledged by the government and is something that needs to be worked on. So, if we go on to the next slide, we can see that the article has provided data regarding underrepresentation. I've separated here by gender and by race. Here it shows that the total population of women and men are shown are shown to differ from the first year students that actually join colleges. So this data was represented in order to show how little women actually become first year students as compared to how many men become first year students, showing that there are more men going to college than there are women, as well as the men's retention rate being 20% higher than the women's. In terms of race, each population is shown to have just about a 50% chance in terms by race. They're going to have a 50% chance of going to college, according to this data, as well as having a significantly lower retention rate than their white counterparts. And this is shown to definitely accentuate the underrepresentation of minorities, as there are much more white there are much more white people going to college than there are other minorities, leaning the balance to be a lot farther towards white men and farther away from minorities and women.
In context to the real world, the US has great scientific and technological efforts, showing great emphasis on their higher education in applied sciences. This includes transportation, energy, and pollution control. Colleges are also putting in place new recruiting strategies and support systems for women and minorities in order to increase their enrollment and retention rates.
The focus of our presentation was to speak to an engineer or engineering student and inquire about the culture of engineering education. As an engineering student myself, I answered the questions from my perspective and asked other students their opinion as well. The first question asked was, how does it feel to be in engineering school? The most common adjectives used to answer this question were stressful and overwhelming. Engineering requires you to pay attention to detail and acquire a new way of learning, and the work involved can take a lot of time. It can also be stressful because many times the problems given are much more complicated than what actually needs to be known in order to be successful. Most often, if you think it is easy, you are most likely doing it wrong. The next question asks, what are some of the most fun and most challenging parts of engineering education? The most fun parts are that you get to work with others and there is a lot of teamwork involved. It is also very satisfying when you work for a very long time on a problem and actually get the answer right at the end. A unique aspect to engineering education is that there are a lot of hands-on projects and practice which keep you engaged. On the other hand, it is challenging to switch the way you think about problems and can be frustrating when you work for hours and do not accomplish much. It is also challenging when you must stay up late or do work on the weekends when your friends in other majors always have free time. The final question asked was if this experience is different for minorities, such as women or people of color. Overall, the answer to that question is yes. Many times, females get excluded from their technical aspects of group projects because men think that their skills are better set for the presentation or writing aspects of the project. Minorities often do not feel a sense of community in their education because they have had a different upbringing in comparison to their peers. Due to this, they will not form many friendships or study groups and will oftentimes struggle to complete their work alone. Engineering is also seen as a profession for intelligent individuals, and some people do not accept that those with disabilities are also capable of becoming an engineer, which decreases the sense of community and education for them as well.
In relation to STS, with what we were looking at, some terms that we were able to pull out were dynamic objectivity, because diverse viewpoints and including more people will result in a stronger cohesive unit and result for engineering projects and goals, but also technological politics and thought collectives are also brought into this, because when you look at engineering education and how people are educated as engineers before going into the field, how they are educated greatly impacts them as engineers and how they're going to act as professionals. A good example of this is the tomato harvester from when we talk about technological politics, because engineers were just looking to solve a solution and their education didn't really, and their experiences that they had during their education didn't allow for them to see what else their creation could have caused. And then also with thought collectives, not having engineering being a very diverse field definitely enforces the idea of thought collectives even more, because you have a lot of similar people and there isn't a lot of diversity, which also contributes to the harmony of illusions in the group, and that can further enforce engineering stereotypes within the group and just how other people view engineering as a field.
Okay, so when we look as to how the status quo has been slowly shifting to create a more inclusive environment for these women and other minorities, there's been an extreme increase in grade school STEM programming. One example is Code with Classy, where a public figure, Carly Kloss, has created a free coding camp for young girls to hopefully get them into comp sci prior to applying to college. A couple of years ago, affirmative action was a big deal when it came to college admissions in order to create a level playing field for previously underrepresented groups. And then within schools, higher education programs themselves, they've often created organizations built to bolster said communities that are underrepresented and marginalized, such as at RPI, we have SWE, which stands for Society of Women Engineers, which provides a community for women in a male-dominated field to come together and work towards a common goal, in addition to National Society of Black Engineers and Society of Hispanic Engineers, which allow for those communities to create a safe space for people who had been previously marginalized to gain career experience and opportunity. So in conclusion, over the course of this presentation, we were trying to understand whether engineers universally conform to the socially inept, technical-minded, detail-focused, unemotional, and analytical stereotype broadcasted to the public, or does the environment that they've been often put into just foster and favor that sort of personality? Clearly, higher education systems have been dominated by white, cisgendered, heterosexual men, fostering potentially the environment that had previously been molding such a stereotypical engineer. These environments sustain high stress, a competitive atmosphere, and a career-focused environment, often very exclusive to those who are previously not represented in those fields at a higher level. Women and those with disabilities, people of color, and people identifying as LGBTQ+ have often been perceived as inept, emotional, untrustworthy, and just generally unfit for this industry, and therefore have been often overlooked when it comes to employment, schooling, speaking up in general. But in order to hopefully change this idea, programs have been put in place to break this typecasting that the engineering field has progressively built. So next we're going to go into the various discussion questions. So I'm just going to read these off because we obviously don't have a class to answer these questions. But the first one is, why or why not is a major cultural shift vital for the collective growth within the engineering field? What would be a goal or desired outcome from said shift, and at what cost to the current engineering community would this shift come? Do you think the engineering field is ready for this major cultural shift we're proposing? If not, why is such a forward and progressive focused field, often focused in innovation, so resistant to this cultural shift? And what additional steps need to be proposed and facilitated in order for said shift to take place? Finally, is the current education system simply creating programs to acclimate students from marginalized groups or varying learning and thinking styles to the current stereotypical engineering environment? Is there any effort towards changing the culture of engineering so that it is a more inclusive and equity conscious environment, thus creating a more diverse